Hi, I'm Paul Camillos from Shooting the Breeze podcast. Join the STB crew for conversations and stories around women's hoops and women in hoops, inspiring players, amazing coaches, and the legends behind the scenes. It's our 7th season. Drop us a like and review, and make sure to subscribe for early access and other bonus content.
Making a run to the finals last year and coming up short, but then also seeing kind of that little bit of dejection of, getting so close to a championship, New York's first championship, and then losing, and then coming back better than ever and really, taking the reins and going back to the finals and sealing the deal in Brooklyn, in their home crowd, so the New York fans can see the first basketball championship in 50 years. That was just such a great experience.
Welcome to Shooting the Breeze. I'm Paul Camillos and my co-host is Jacinta Govind, and for the first episode of Series 7, we're joined by Alford Corriette from the New York area, fan of the New York Liberty and a fantastic source of scouting and breakdowns of the WNBA and also international players. Alford, welcome to the show. It's great to have you here.
It's great to be on. Thank you for having me. I'm honored.
Now we're going to get all embarrassed. So, Alford, first of all, tell us a little bit about yourself and also how you got into women's hoops and, the sort of contributions you put forward for the sport so that people who don't know who you are can understand, how you're supporting the game.
Sure. So I am a contributor for Her Hoop Stats, which is a statistical based website. Think of it as kind of like Basketball Reference, but for the women's game with more advanced analytics. But we also branch off into other things such as the CBA FAQ for the WNBA and also our daily newsletter, which I occasionally write for, covering the New York Liberty. And then I also on the side doing scouting and international breakdowns, just covering players that I think can, really produce on the next level. Have been covering the New York Liberty for 2 years at this point. In terms of the women's game, have always been a fan of women's basketball. It's always appealed to me. I actually was a practice player in college for my women's team, helping them out in that aspect. Definitely got torched a few times on defense, so good thing there's no cameras for that. But definitely have always been a fan of the game and, just trying to see what I can do to help it expand.
Cool. Let's talk, New York and New York Liberty, let's talk about that for a second because they got their first chip and you were close in on the action as well. So from your perspective, what was that run to the end like? And, let's be honest, there were a few controversies in there as well. Let's sort of have a bit of a talk about that.
Well, most definitely. Well, in terms of the journey, before we get to the controversy, the journey was fun. To see them really go from where they were in terms of playing at Westchester under the Dolan era to now being bought out by Joe Tsai and really seeing the Tsai family put the investment in the team and ultimately putting that star-studded roster together with John Paul Jones and Breanna Stewart and amongst others with Sabrina Ionescu, making a run to the finals last year and coming up short, but then also seeing kind of that little bit of dejection of, getting so close to a championship, New York's first championship, and then losing, and then coming back better than ever and really, taking the reins and going back to the finals and sealing the deal in Brooklyn, in their home crowd, so the New York fans can see the first basketball championship in 50 years. That was just such a great experience. But in terms of the controversy, what controversy? Do you want to elaborate on that?
Look, we don't want to get the officials offside, but there were some, let's say, open to interpretation decisions in some of those games.
It was some NBA reffing in a WNBA final.
I think, we've heard it from both coaches in the pressers. Obviously you had Cheryl Reeve after game 3, I believe it was, saying that she felt that Breanna Stewart it was hard to really play against her because of the officiating and how she's officiated on both ends of the game. Obviously, Brianna Stewart, her lengthy wingspan, she can shoot over people. Sometimes you knock into her arms, it's called a foul, but then also the physicality aspect. And then in game 4, you really saw that transition where the game was called a little bit tighter on New York's end. Brianna Stewart got into a little bit of foul trouble. And another also controversial call at the end of game 4, some people felt shouldn't have been called on Sabrina Ionescu, which gave Minnesota free throws that put them up, and obviously New York wasn't able to hit the shot at the end. That prompted Australian legend Sandy Brondello to, really have her go of things in the press conference and really, say, do I have to speak up as well based on, what happened, what Shoa Reeve did. And then game 5 really set the stage for a very physical and low scoring affair. And then a little bit of controversy at the end of regulation with, Brianna Stewart getting fouled. I mean, some angles show it's a foul. Some people may say it's not a foul. Me being from New York, I will go with the referee's decision. But, that sent the game to overtime, and New York was able to seal the deal. And here we are talking about the 2024 WNBA champion New York Liberty.
I want to ask quickly, New York Liberty were very close to the championship last season as well. And sometimes when teams are, in finals contention in back-to-back seasons, they don't always manage to get the chip the second time around. But what do you think were the main differences and important differences between last season and this season that helped them win the championship?
So I think the main difference from a tactical and roster standpoint was the defensive abilities and the increased defense. When you add in a player like a 6'4", Leonie Fibic, who's just phenomenal on the defensive end, even though she's a rookie, has experience playing overseas, played in Australia for a little bit and also played in Spain for Zaragoza, what she can do on the offensive end, also as a two-way player, can knock down three-pointers, can affect things on the defensive end. I actually asked Sandy Brondello who she sees in Leonie Fibic, and one of the names that she brought up was Beck Allen, another Australian player, just on what she can do. So, having a two-way player like Leonie and then also having experienced players like a Kennedy Burke that can come off the bench, Kayla Thornton as a role player to increase her game on both ends of the floor, you were able to see Nyara Sabally take an advanced step from her rookie season to this year. And then just overall having better chemistry, now the players were settled in. Getting Jonquil Jones to stay in New York was also a key thing, bringing her back, getting everybody to buy in and say, hey, we were so close, but now that we have this refined and retooled roster, let's give it a go. And I think that all just came together and really you see the difference.
Was there any talk during the off-season that maybe Jonquil Jones wouldn't be coming back?
Well, what was hard about Jonquil Jones' situation was that her contract had finished and her contract was under the core designation. So how the WNBA works is the teams can assign basically a core player that they have the exclusive rights to unless they trade, but the core threshold is 2 seasons. And then after that, you can't core them. So essentially, they're a completely unrestricted free agent after they finish that contract. So there was always going to be talk about whether Jonquil Jones leaves because teams like Las Vegas had cap space. Would there be a possible return of Jonquil Jones to the DC area where she grew up, kind of coming after the Bahamas, going to maybe the Washington Mystics? But Jonquil Jones really liked what the New York Liberty organization were able to present, and she said, you know what, I really like what we have here and I want to continue this quest for the championship in New York.
Turned out to be a very good decision indeed, given where both of the teams ended up on the ladder in the WNBA season.
Yes, it did. And, it paid off. Jonquil Jones came back and became the finals MVP.
Wow. And you mentioned, you referred to Sandy Brondello before as the legendary Sandy Brondello. So respect, Do the New York Liberty fans and maybe wider or even fringe New York Liberty fans understand how legendary she actually is and much of her playing history like we would?
Oh, I don't actually think so. I think most American fans know Sandy as a coach that won with the Phoenix Mercury. They know that she played in the WNBA for a little bit, but I don't think they realize, she was a quality player in Australia, a WNBL MVP multiple times, scoring champion. I think, some New York fans just know her as the smart coach with a nice accent, but, I'm hoping that can, change in future periods, and then you can appreciate the greatness of Sandy.
So it might be time to get some of those vintage Opals photos out when she was playing in the bodysuits and
Yeah.
at the Olympics and things like that. And give the New York Liberty fans a history lesson.
Exactly. If you have the content down there, send them my way. I can definitely help, bring that to New York.
Yeah, I'll be tagging you on lots of things.
Of course.
It was, like you mentioned, it was a pretty amazing final series. And game 4 particularly, I mean, we got to call out Alana Smith for forcing the series to go to game 5. I'm going to ask this in two ways. First of all, from the point of view of a New York Liberty fan, how did you feel about that performance? And then secondly, from the point of view of a statistician, how did you feel about that performance?
About Alana Smith?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I thought a lot from the New York Liberty standpoint. Obviously, Alana Smith gave us some trouble, because she's just a fantastic player. 6'3", 6'4" ish. Great on the defensive end. Can also knock down perimeter shots. She's really like the type of player you want. And then just seeing especially playing injured. She had that back injury and she was really giving it all. As a New York Liberty media person, it was not the best thing to see, Alana Smith go off at times. But, from the perspective of just an overall fan of the game, I definitely love what Alana Smith provides the W.
And in relation to her performance across that final series, looking at it from the point of view of, the breakdowns and statistically, how did you see her performance overall?
Oh, I think her performance was definitely what you really wanted from Minnesota, because I think for her, she's one of Minnesota's biggest players, so obviously you needed her for her size, especially when you're facing a New York Liberty team that has size. When you think of the 6'6" John Paul Jones, 6'4" Breanna Stewart, 6'5" Niara Sabli, 6'4" Leo, you needed someone of her size to really be able to counteract that, and just being able to be a screener, being able to be a roller, being able to be a popper, just being able to fit what Cheryl Reeve has in the system, which is a lot of ball screens, a lot of movement, and really getting the open shots, not just for herself, but also for other players. But then also on the defensive side, just being able to contest some of the New York Liberty's size and then also blow up things like the New York Liberty's ball screens and stuff like that. I think that's really what you have to give kudos to Alana Smith for. And again, being able to do that with a back injury. I mean, right now I'm dealing with a little bit of a minor back injury myself, and I don't even want to look at physical activity. So I can't think of, what Alana Smith was going through.
So you might have to be sidelined from the regular Sunday pickup basketball for a little while, Al.
Listen, I've been retired from basketball for a while. I'm just doing the breakdowns from now. I'll give you the mental, but if you need me in the low post or try to do a drum shot, I'll let you and Paul handle the basketball.
I'm going to go totally off script here because there's a question I've been kind of curious about. I've noticed that there's been a bit more interest in the statistical side of the game, particularly for the women's game, over the last maybe 18 to 24 months. From your perspective, because you're in there all the time, what do you put that down to?
I think just more information. Fans want, if you think about statistics give you information on what a player is doing, how they're performing. And I think as more and more fans get into the game and want to know more about these players, they're going to gravitate to the statistical side of things because they're going to want that information. They're going to see, okay, who are some of the top 3-point shooters? I want to see how they're doing. Who are some of the top shot blockers who are good at forcing turnovers? Who's good at the plus minus side of things? And I think as more and more of the stat heads that really follow basketball in general come to the W and women's basketball side of things, they really want to get that advanced information. So I think that's what you're going to see with the rise of statistics, with the rise of the overall game in itself.
And as a stat man and a basketball fan, do you ever feel like there's too many stats or there's some stats that are irrelevant? Because I've noticed as well, when I was watching a lot more of the men's game in the last couple of years, depending on what broadcast you're watching and who was reporting, there was just so many stats and it wasn't a lot of storylines or it wasn't a lot of commentary on what they were actually doing. Everything was just kind of a stat and I didn't understand it. So do you ever feel like in your position it could be too much of a good thing?
Yeah, I think there's a pro and negative side to it. I think the negative is like what you kind of alluded to just into, where like you're just throwing out stats without really explaining, okay, why is this statistically important? You know, like someone who's good on the media side of things here in the States, Kevin Pelton, he has things such as like wins over replacement, but he'll explain it in the articles why, this pertains to the W. Why is this special for a player? So I think with statistics, it's not necessarily having too much of it. It's basically saying how does it, like, why is this important as it relates to the game, and not just throwing out our figures as like, okay, like plus minus of 10, okay, why is this important, rather than just giving that out on television.
One of the things I've noticed as well is there's been to me anyway, it looks like there's been a rise in the number of books that are out there on basketball statistics, which is always a sure sign that, there's more interest in the statistical side of the game. For the uninitiated, what do you think are the most important statistics to keep an eye on? Because, we have listeners who range from who really understand the game inside out to, relatively new people to the game. So it'd be interesting to be able to, give them some pointers.
Yeah, so I think you can look at it from multiple levels. You have like your basic stats, like as per game, points, rebounds, assists, and whatnot. But I think you also have the advanced things like plus minus. You can look at things such as defensive ratings, offensive ratings that measure things based on possessions. Typically, I like to look at statistics that really more are geared to like what a player is doing on the floor, because I think that's where you really get to see like what that player can do. Another layer that is actually going to be more important, I think, now with the rise of stats is also the video component of it, because there's things such as second spectrum technology, which the WNBA is now using, where you're getting, statistics on specific things like how well a player is doing in screen actions, how well is a player doing in off-ball situations. So I think as things like that become more available to the public, which they not necessarily are right now, as the public are able to get more information on that, I think that's really where, fans are really going to enjoy seeing things and trying to put those things together.
Yeah, we've had access to software that can show us some of those statistics, but I didn't take the time to learn it. But someone gave me a crash course one day, and they used the example of, when these two particular players are in a pick and roll, then 66% of the time they get a scoring option, or
Exactly.
66, 45% of the time they'll do a pick and pop and do a three. And it would just like open so many more doors in my mind that I was like, I don't know if I can fit any more of this information in, but it's pretty remarkable that there's software now and programs that can measure that stuff.
Oh, incredible! It definitely is. Like one platform that I use with the scouting, which a lot of scouts use, is Synergy, and it tells you things such as the points generated in pick and roll actions, points generated in transition, and I think like things like that, seeing like how well you're doing on the offensive end, are going to help fans, because fans also like those little nuanced things of the game, not aside from just, okay, a player scoring 24 points. How are they scoring those 24 points? Are they doing it through the post? Are they doing it, more on the perimeter? Are they doing it through just, rolling and other things like that? So I think as, those type of statistics become more available, that's going to be where you really see another increased fanfare in the statistic side of things.
I think it's going to be really interesting to see how this is going to develop over the next few years, because there is a big uptick in interest in the analytics, but there's also growth in the fan base. One of the things I'm curious about for the Liberty is, what's the feeling amongst the Liberty fans about the team?
Oh, I think Liberty fans are heaven right now. I mean, just won a championship. We were able to have a ticker tape parade in the city. We were able to have another celebration in Brooklyn as well. And I think for New York Liberty fans, it's kind of the culmination of what they've been seeing, come to a head. They've seen the team get better year after year. They've seen the organization invest in not just the infrastructure internally, but also investing in engaging with the community, trying to do community events, and really trying to bring the WNBA and women's basketball to the city of New York, and to really see that increased fanfare, because now we're talking about going from maybe around 9,000 fans when they first went into Barclays Center, especially in the post-COVID era, to now, around that 12,000, 13,000, and in the finals you had multiple games where it's like 17,000 people, 18,000 people. Like for the first time, I think the Liberty did standing room only because there was just so much intrigue of like where they're headed. So I think that's really what you're seeing with the Liberty.
And added to that, you wrote a piece about the community outreach that the New York Liberty has undertaken. How has that helped to build the team up in the greater New York area?
Yeah, I think it's really about, building and giving that team a profile, bringing the players to the community in a sense. Like one event that I can think of that I've talked about in that article, the Brooklyn Dribble, it was a free to the public event, so it wasn't, separated by any pay or anything. It was geared towards allowing youth and families to come out and dribble along Brooklyn Bridge Park. So it's an event where you're getting people out and about in the summer really engaging with the organization. But then you also had players like Kennedy Burke and Kayla Thornton there who were also there, communicating with the fans, also speaking. You had a fan fest where you're having different Liberty themed booths and food trucks. You also had rapper MC Light give a performance there. So you're really showing that, hey, this is a team where you can really come and, enjoy yourself and really be able to do things with the team. And then also, I think another key part is also the Liberty were able to have a new local deal with the local channel here, Fox 5 and My 9. So that allowed the New York Liberty to be available in virtually every household in the tri-state area, in the New York, New Jersey, Connecticut area. So you're also expanding the exposure for the Liberty in the community as well that way.
Some of those things as well, like you always see, for us in Australia, you always see American sports as like, the pedestal kind of thing and the untouchables, the real sporting greats. And so I didn't kind of transfer the idea that NBL and WNBL is that for us here. And they do a lot of community things. They'll go to schools, they'll, do local radio, and that is becoming very normal. But yeah, I only just realized that perhaps that is unbroken territory over there for someone like a WNBA team to go and do that stuff more regularly, or at least have a big fan event for when they win a championship. Because even down here, if the NRL team wins or if your A-League team wins, there's a parade and there's a thing at the local shopping centre. But yeah, it didn't really cross my mind until you mentioned it. And were you putting that on your Twitter as well? Were you doing live feeds to that event on Twitter, I think I saw?
Yes. So I was at the parade, shooting it with the floats. And I think what made it so special was, again, this is not only like the Liberty's first championship, this was New York City's first basketball championship since the 1970s. So you're having a generation of people who weren't even alive to like see their team have a ticker tape parade. So this was just a special moment where you're having this new generation of basketball fans, but you're also having the older generation of basketball fans that, may have been kids when the Knicks last won in the NBA side, now seeing, the Liberty and the WNBA side get their first championship. So many people came out amongst all age groups. So you're really seeing them really adopt the Liberty as their own team and really seeing like, okay, this is a team we can get behind because they encapsulate what we are, which is grit and that toughness and really stick-to-itness. And after multiple attempts at trying to win at WNBA finals, finally getting over the hump.
And along with that, with those events, Jonquil Jones did an event herself as well. I saw some photos about that. So can you tell us a little bit more about that event?
Are you talking about the West Indian night?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the Liberty, what they've also done is they also started hosting theme nights at specific games based on different cultures, different ideas. So they've had things like Noche Latina to celebrate, Latin Heritage Night. They've done stuff such as AAPI Night to celebrate Asian American and Pacific Islander culture in the city. They've done the West Indian Night to celebrate Caribbean culture in the city, Sneakerhead Night, Unity Night, all different things to really engage with the Brooklyn community, because the Brooklyn community is one of the most diverse communities, in America. So really being able to do things where fans of all races, all backgrounds could come and, partake in different cultures, where they'll have different musical events, they'll have different booths, they'll have merchandise, different food items, different food options, to where you're really being immersed not just in the basketball sense, but you're also being immersed in the cultural sense.
So I'm kind of curious to talk a little bit about the WNBL because, before we started recording, you mentioned that you've had your eye on the WNBL, not only the imported players, but also some of the Australian players as well. So I'm just curious to hear your opinions on how you've been seeing the WNBL just over the few rounds that we've had so far, and the players, and how you've been seeing the league developing over the last few weeks.
Oh, I love what we're seeing. Last year was actually my first year getting into the WNBL. So, really seeing it and really covering it and seeing what it can do, I was like, oh, I have to definitely cover this because this is just a fun league. But in terms of this season, just seeing some of the teams really compete, like Bendigo has been on a tear. Like Sydney, which was probably a team that was great, last year, faltering a little bit, but I think that's the beauty of the WNBL, where any team can really have a breakout season. I think last year was, the year of Perth and Southside, whereas, now you're having other teams in the mix this year. In terms of players, we can go with the WNBA imports. I think Leticia Me here has had a fantastic, first few stretches. I think right now she's on pace to have more points maybe within 6-7 games in the WNBL than she's had for her entire WNBA career. And I think, that can be chalked up to, maybe not getting enough minutes in the rotation, not, being in a position to get enough, maybe the confidence and reps to succeed. But the beauty of overseas play and playing in somewhere in the WNBL is you're getting that luxury, you're getting those reps to really develop your craft, but also play the game that you love. So it's a good thing for players like me here. Naz Hillman always, looks great, continuing that stretch she had for Melbourne last year. Always quality in the post. She's had some good games. Sammy Whitcomb continues to look like a flamethrower, just knocking down shots. Another Aussie legend, Sammy Whitcomb, and former New York Liberty. I have to add that in there. Otherwise, Sandy will probably never let me hear the end of it. So, but she looks great. And then also, I know a player that me and Jacinta are fans of, Shanice Swain. We're all aboard the Swain train. So,
Oh, absolutely.
It's catching on.
And she was absolutely on fire in that game on Wednesday.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, she was the real standout for the Flames in that game in terms of trying to keep the club in touch with Bendigo, particularly because, let's be honest, Sammy was just on fire that game.
Yes, Sammy really was. And I mean, that's what she's been in the WNBA and WNBL. You know her as a knockdown shooter. But to see Shanice Swain, especially someone on the younger end of the players, really developing, drafted in 2023 to the Sparks, and then there were questions on, like how can she fare, coming over into the WNBA. I know she took the year off to really work with the WNBL and NBL stuff, and just watching her develop, watching her continue to grow and mature as a player, and you're really seeing it on the floor where she's she's driving more, she's taking contact. It's not just the quick trigger three. She's also doing things on the floor to try to help the team win. She's playing with Kayla George, who's also phenomenal, another Aussie legend. I keep throwing Aussie legend around, but there's so many fantastic players in the WNBL that are doing their thing, so I have to give them credit.
Well, Aussie and legend sometimes go hand in hand, because legend is a very common adjective we use to describe someone we have a lot of admiration and affection for in Australia. So you've got the lingo already under your belt, Al. So Aussie legend is very appropriate.
All right, I'm doing good.
Doing good.
Absolutely.
Good. And just with Shanice Swain, I think, as you said, she was drafted and then stashed and tried to work on her game while she was still here, but spent a lot of last season injured, so couldn't really get going in the back end of the season. So then had another off season. But what's exciting for us is that we're finally getting to see her back on court after what's been pretty much over 12 months since we saw her healthy and playing, and she's starting. And I think all of that hard work is coming to fruition. I didn't expect her to be so strong so early after having so much time like on the sideline. But yeah, that quick trigger three, her 3-point consistency certainly improved. Yeah, she's definitely being more aggressive on the drive. Just got to, I think, start to improve her court vision and decision making when she's trying to look for that outlet pass. But a lot of promising things early for the Swain train.
Oh, of course, and I can't wait. I'm hoping that we definitely are able to see her in Los Angeles sometime down the road, as that's the team that drafted her, because I think that would be good for her to get that exposure, especially on the next level, and see where she can compete and where she can be. But definitely fan of the Swain train. Another player that's been good, that I think has been helpful. I'm looking at Perth, Allie Wilson. She stepped in and has been key at times for them in the absence of Amy Atwell. Hoping to see Amy Atwell back soon. I know she's been injured. Just different players all across the board that are doing well in the WNBL. Alicia Frawling. There's just there's just such a ton of talent that I'm overwhelmed. You kind of hear me glowing, because it's just like I've really become such a big fan of the WNBL and the Australian side of basketball over this year and a half, where I just can't stop talking about it.
Good. Keep talking about it, because
Absolutely.
we've known how good it's been for a long time, and slowly through social media and different pathways. And I know that there's a big community growing on Threads, WNBA Threads, and then we're trying to infiltrate that group now with, hey, if you're missing the WNBA, there's plenty of WNBL to watch. You'll love what we've got to offer. But I don't think I've ever asked. I'm interested to know, what was your, I guess, gateway or facilitator to the WNBL? How did you first come across it, and what kind of sparked your interest?
Yeah, so I think, covering the WNBA, you've had players that go overseas to Australia, like Aditi Richards, Sam Wickham's going to go over there. But I was always interested in just finding out, okay, how can I watch these players in the off season and really see what they're doing? Because, a lot of people sometimes think that, okay, especially here in the States, that once the WNBA season ends, okay, that's it for women's basketball. Time for the NBA, and, there's nothing else out there. But I really wanted to find that, and then being able to find out, okay, how can I watch the WNBL? And then last season, knowing that it was streamed for free on the FIBA channel, I was like, okay, this is, beautiful, because now it's not like you have to pay for an extra subscription or anything like that. It's really accessible on YouTube, and, started watching. I think the first game I watched may have been Melbourne versus Southside with Jordan Canada and Nas Silverman versus Lauren Jackson and Nadia Opacha and Maddie Rashi and the crew. And I was like, oh, this is fun. And then I just was hooked, and then watching other games, watching Perth with Ari McDonald last season, and then just, it just became one after the other and compounded. And I was like, oh, this is fun.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, so that's a great plug as well, to try and keep things like the WNBL and even all of the international FIBA tournaments as free as possible, because they're all on the FIBA YouTube channel too. And that's how, we're going to slowly become more of the world game than our competitor, that is soccer. Main competitor will be in the world game title as soccer, to try and keep it free on YouTube. And then have you started to... I mean, understandably, basketball taking up a lot of time, and there's a lot of basketball content to consume all the time. Have you started to dabble in the New Zealand professional league at all?
I have dabbled here and there. I've heard about it, and I think Jordan Horston, who's WNBA player, is playing over there, and she's been playing pretty well. So I have seen her, like, what she's been doing over there, and I think that's just like the beauty of this game and women's basketball increasing, because it's also increasing the profile in other countries, to where, New Zealand's basketball league is a hot topic. The WNBL is out there. I saw Whoopi Goldberg, her Women's Sports Network has the new partnership with the WNBL, so where you can have like a known American celebrity, actually investing in the Australian Women's Basketball League, and then seeing other leagues like EuroLeague and Eurocup and other leagues come to the forefront. I think it's just amazing to see that rise of women's basketball on a global stage.
Yeah, it seems to me that there's actually more vocal interest in the women's game than there is vocal interest in the men's game, particularly over the last 12 to 18 months. And it's interesting, and I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that the women's game tends to be a lot more dynamic on the floor in comparison to the men's game. How do you see that?
Yeah, so I think that's the interesting part you put about it, with it being more dynamic. I've always kind of looked at the women's game as a bit more skillful than the men's game, to where, I feel like I think that's where like the fundamentals shine a lot. And, when you're able to see players that are well-rounded players. I've always had a saying, and I'm not sure like how many people may agree with me, but I've always said, to me, women's basketball is basketball in its pure form. And I think that's a lot of people may be kind of catching on to that idea of like, okay, this is, I know the saying in the States is real hoops. So I think, some people are looking at it as, advanced form of the game and just a game that they can really get into without maybe the fluff and filler that you may see in the men's side of things.
I agree. The women's game is certainly more of a purer form. I mean, we have the advantage of growing up and playing basketball and learning it fundamentally as players. So then we can have that lens of what's kind of more of a pure form versus what's NBA style of play. But I agree that the women's game is certainly more to its pure form, a lot more team concepts. I mean, the defense is great, and it's not so much of a kind of catch and shoot or lots of isolation plays. Or I can't remember the last time I watched maybe an NBA game where I could see that they were purposefully running an offense, if that makes sense. Like it's
Oh,
almost like a glorified street ball sometimes, and I'm going to get crucified for saying that.
no, no. I mean, I think we're seeing it. Think I saw a post where like ratings in the NBA are declining, and like people are trying to figure out like why is that, and you'll see fans and they'll say, oh, it's the same kind of system. Everyone's kind of shooting threes. It's just drive and kick offenses. Everyone's doing the same thing and playing the same way, basically. Whereas a lot of maybe the conceptual aspects and the X's and O's and things may not be as there as fans really want to get into that part.
Yeah, and it can be more. It started to become more of a showcase of who's got big dunks, who's got the most athleticism, and who can shoot threes from the furthest point. And that's why you have your hallmark players like your Giannis, Curry, and whoever. I guess LeBron's still going. I mean, he's still an athletic phenomenon given his age and his physique. But when it's kind of broken down into those three parts and then everyone starts to catch up on each other, then you think, oh, is that all there is? Or is there a bit more substance to this?
Yeah, yeah, no, definitely for sure. And I think that's what you're kind of seeing. You're seeing that the pinnacle of it where fans are like, is this really like the game that I like? And then especially if you're gonna have that over an 82 game season, there's gonna be a lot of slippage where fans are like, okay, let's just wait till playoffs or anything where we feel like it may be a bit more competitive, a bit more physical, a bit more is actually added to it. Whereas with women's basketball, you're getting that every game.
And going back to before we were talking about players that you've kept your eye on in the WNBL in the last couple of seasons, a lot of emerging talent like the Shanice Swains. And you and I before have also talked about Nadia Poch, given that she was drafted as well. But someone that you've also started to keep your eye on and are quite equally as excited about is Saffron Shields. So Saffron is still... No, she's already started to become a pretty common name in the WNBL, and she's only in her second fully contracted season. I think she only turned 18 this year, maybe, or maybe 19 this year. How did she get on your radar?
Yeah, so I've heard like it was actually I think you were the first person to mention like Saffron. I think maybe in a response, and I was like, let me see what Saffron Shields is about, and then had the opportunity to watch her in the U18 Asia Cup that Australia was able to win. And then I was just enamored with like what she is, like a 6'2" lead guard that's able to get downhill, really push the pace in transition, get into the lane, drive, and then open up things for her teammates. I was like, she's doing all this at 6'2", which is unheard of, because you don't really see a 6'2" point guard or a 6'2" main guard doing that type of things every day. And I was like, this is a player I really have to, keep more of. And I was just flabbergasted that we weren't hearing more of a player like Saffron Shields, given like what she's doing, especially to do that against tough teams like China and others in the U18 Asia Cup, where she really led Australia to win over players like Zhang Ziyu, who also had a phenomenal U18 Asia Cup run. And just seeing what Saffron Shields can do, watching her play in NBL one, seeing what I could find for her there, and then after seeing that, I was like, I'm hooked. Like this is a player I have to keep my eyes on and see how she progresses, how she develops. And I think being in Townsville with Coach Shannon is also a good spot for her because Townsville is probably where she can really develop her craft and work hard. And I'm excited to see what she can do Also got a chance to see her at the Basketball Without Borders camp in Phoenix that they had. So for WNBA All-Star Weekend, Without Borders had a camp featuring the high school prospects around the globe. He was able to participate in it, really excelled there, was able to interview her at the camp and, talk to her and talk to her about just her experiences at the camp and, being part of this new Australian basketball crux, because you have so many young talents coming out. We talked about Nadia, we have Saffron, but also some names that may not be as popular, like a Opal Bird here in the States, or Monique Mbangi, or Bonnie Dees and Sienna Harvey and all those players, that are coming up the ranks. So for her to be a part of it, just seeing like the joy she has, and then also asking Coach Brondello about like what she thinks about that, and just seeing the rise of that new class. And I'm just so happy for Saffron, and I'm just hoping the best for her.
Well, she's someone as well. She was a junior with Newcastle basketball, which is one of my hometown kind of rivals, because they're only like 60, 90 minutes north from us. So in the league that I played in as a junior for my club, we used to play Newcastle all the time. And then you go and play for your region when you make state teams, being New South Wales country. So she was a name that was always popping up in our scene. And it's really cool when you get to see that transpire now that she's playing WNBL and on that world stage of Asia Cup that you mentioned. But those Basketball Without Borders camps sound really intriguing. It seems like something that was developing over a long period of time, focusing on the men's program first. And now we're seeing more and more of the women's programs popping up. I think we held one in Australia 1 or 2 years ago. And was that your first time going to one of those camps in Phoenix, or have you been to a couple?
Oh, that was my first camp, and it was a tremendous experience. Seeing the future of basketball really own their craft, and I do like how they structured it for the international players, because they were able to compete in the view of college coaches. So you had college coaches from across the country come there and watch their games, but you also had some WNBA level executives and coaches that were there. I saw GM of the Sun, Darius Taylor. He was there in attendance.
We'll circle back to that.
Coach Trammell from Dallas, she was also in attendance for one. We also had from other teams, so really seeing them be able to increase their exposure to where they're getting the opportunity, so these college coaches can see them where they may not necessarily get that opportunity to see them compete. And I'll give you for example, a name that really has blossomed from that: Blanca Quinones. So if you haven't heard of Blanca Quinones, she recently committed to UConn. However, she's actually an Ecuadorian prospect. And Ecuador is not a country that you automatically would assume of being a basketball hotbed, but she's, one of the most talented prospects. I would argue at the Basketball Without Borders camps, it was actually her and Saffron as like the top two that really like drew attention, alongside Asha Sivka from Slovenia and others. Like Blanca Quinones really came on the scene, and she was one of the talked about players at 6'1", very versatile wing, has experience playing professionally in Italy. And, she's a relatively unknown name. And, I was kind of like the one that kind of started pushing her out there as well, because like, this is a player that can really do things. And that's the joy of the Basketball Without Borders camps, is that they're giving players like a Blanca Quinones, like Saffron Shields and others, that exposure and opportunity to really make a mark.
Wow, that's an incredible story. Like you said, I would never have thought that Ecuador would have basketball up and running, and it's not a common country, that's producing international talent. And to be signed at UConn is a really big deal. But interesting you mentioned she had professional experience playing in Italy, because I'm sure you've noticed, with keeping an eye on the landscape that is international women's basketball, there are a lot of younger talents who will come from a country or an area where basketball isn't as thriving, and they'll end up going to play in pro leagues or going to play with a club overseas as soon as they're, like as young as 15 years old, and just rising through the ranks. I know a lot of young African players will go to Europe as well and go to a club and almost have like a host family and just develop their game there and end up playing pro. It sounds like a whole other world that we need to get into.
Oh yeah, that's definitely, things like that are, becoming common, where you really see like players go to different countries, really expand their game, and then find their way overseas. And I think that's just the beauty of basketball. because Coach Cinnamon Lister, who was kind of one of the main leads, she has experience coaching everywhere. She talked about, basketball being a language of its own. And, I think that's the beauty of basketball on an international level, where it's bridging so many cultures and it's really moving people from place to place and really expanding just the game on an entirely different level. And circle back on Darius Taylor.
When you mentioned Darius Taylor, he's a busy man. So we went to a Flames game last season at the Key Centre, and a friend of mine very kindly offered me his spare seat sitting courtside. So obviously I was going to take it. And that was the weekend where a lot of WNBA coaches and managers were watching multiple WNBL games. I think there were at least 3 or 4 WNBA clubs represented in this one weekend between Sydney and Melbourne. And we just so happened to sit next to someone wearing Connecticut Sun gear, looking very, very focused on what he was watching. And we were trying to suss out, who is this guy? He has to be someone important if he's wearing all of the Connecticut Sun stuff. So us being nosy, we struck up a conversation and we were like, oh, are you a scout? Are you a fan? Are you, what's your deal? And he's like, oh, I'm actually the GM of the Sun. And I was like, oh my gosh. And Googled it later, Darius Taylor. He didn't give up that information very quickly. He was trying to be very modest about it and talk about how he used to play and, oh yeah, I used to be a scout for Atlanta, and just kind of giving us these little crumbs of information to piece together who he was. And it was Darius Taylor. I have since found him on Instagram and reached out to be a guest on Shooting the Breeze, and he was keen, but I think he is quite a busy man to get a hold of to get him on a podcast. That's so funny you mentioned him.
Oh yeah, he definitely is busy, because I was definitely not expecting. He was actually one of the first faces I saw, when I walked into the gym. I was like, oh, this is an interesting sight. But then again, it kind of makes sense when you look at last year's draft. This year's, I should say, they drafted Layla Khan from France. So obviously Darius is definitely having his eyes on a global sense, watching France, watching Australia. And I think that's where the WNBA, you're going to really see a shift, where more and more players from overseas are really getting a chance to shine.
And side note, how good was she at the Olympics?
Oh, she was phenomenal.
Yeah. So she's only what, 19, 20?
Yeah, 19, 20. And and hopefully the Sun bring her over soon, because she's going to be a player that they hopefully have for the future. And I mean, when you think about Layla Khan, look at that French team that almost beat Team USA, when you think about it, to be up double digits at one point over a team that has Asia Wilson and Brianna Stewart and so many players. France in general, they're a basketball factory. You look at things on the men's and women's side, the players they're churning out. Australia too. Australia's churning out talent, and I definitely love the shift that we're seeing.
Yeah, us too. I feel like we've kind of quickly covered and almost accidentally summarized this particular age group in women's basketball, like your Layla Khans and your Saffron Shields, and we've still got lots of college prospects. Georgia Amore is now at Kentucky. She's another Aussie doing good things over there. Isla Juffermans is someone who has played a lot with Saffron Shields as a junior, and now she's playing for Louisville. But just how much the women's game has grown, and for some reason in that particular age group, it is just really high quality internationally. Be really interesting to go back one day and figure out how this boom happened, because it just seems like to be a generational thing.
Yeah, that is a good point you bring, because it very much is deep in that age range. And I guess we can just chalk it up to the overall growth of women's basketball as a whole. As more people get involved, more people, the eyes get to the game. I think that's going to be the beautiful thing. And when you think about this age group, you're seeing the talent and potential now. How does this age group look like now in 5-10 years? Once they've got that experience, and then how does that next generation follow them, and how basketball just becomes deeper on an international level? I think that's going to be amazing.
And it's probably a very unique situation too, where you've got the likes of a Silas Swords, who's in her freshman year with Michigan, Hailey Van Lith about to wrap up her college career with TCU. Both of them Olympians and playing back playing college. When was the last time that happened, if ever?
Yeah, it's rare. And, I definitely have to give a shout out to Silas Swords, since she played at Long Island Lutheran in New York. So I have to give my chief New York plug there for Silas Swords. But It's definitely great to see just the international flow into the game.
So one of the questions I want to ask to both of you, if we're looking at the growth of the game internationally, where are the countries, where are the locations that people need to look at for the unsung talent, the ones that we don't normally get to see? Where do you think we'll find them?
Oh, I think the two regions that I would like to see more, I guess, resources and development and eyes, definitely Africa, the continent of Africa, because there's a lot of talent, a lot of untapped potential there, especially on the women's side, especially what we talked about previously of like them going to Europe and other places to own their craft. If they can be able to do it in their respective countries, that would be great. And then I'm also interested to see if the Caribbean can also improve as a basketball hotbed, because when you think of players like a Jonquil Jones from the Bahamas and had to relocate to the United States, Aaliyah Boston in a similar position, and we're talking about two players who are two of the top bigs in this league, and there's always going to be more players down there that are seeing this. I mean, case in point, Jonquil Jones has been in the Bahamas, they're having parades for her for celebrating the title. So like think of how many of those young players like I want to do that, but will they be able to have the resources to really kind of follow Jonquil Jones's trajectory? So if we're able to get more resources and more eyes and see those regions develop, I think that's going to be good. South America, also you want to keep your eyes on them. Brazil is a country that's really going to be tough, I think, in the next couple of years, because we've seen players from Brazil go into the professional ranks like a Camilo Cardoso. You have players like Demiris Dantas. But you also had some players in the Brazilian youth team system that have gotten college offers. When you think of players like Thaisa Queiroz, you think of players like Manuela Alves. I mean, Thais is going to UNC. Manuela Alves is going to Illinois. You also had Alexia Ruhodagba, also was at the BWB camp. She's going to Georgetown. So now you're seeing players from South America also be able to make their mark in the American collegiate scene. So I think South America, Caribbean, Africa, Asia, also I think you're going to see an increase there. Because right now I think the traditional scene has been Europe and Australia. And Europe and Australia continues to churn out talent, but I think as you have more exposure in these other regions, I think that's where you're really going to want to keep your eyes on.
What about India?
That's a good one. I would put India in that category. I'm really curious to see, because I think a lot of things too, it's like, are the countries willing to put the resources into investing that sport? That's been a recurring trend. Like when you talk about the international game, it's not just the growth of the game, it's are you willing to put the resources into India and into other small countries? But I would be happy to see Indian prospects come and flourish, because I think in terms of Indian prospects in basketball as a whole, it's really been like players like Simbular and Satnam Singh on the men's side that have really been able to make their mark. But I don't think we've had too many players on the women's side. So I think that would be another thing to see grow and develop.
Well, you're definitely going to get a chance to see some of the talent from India next year in the New Zealand League, because they've got two teams coming in, one men's, one women's, going into their leagues next year, starting from next year. So hopefully that's going to be a start, and it's also going to start to open up more pathways for players in India.
I'll definitely be on the lookout for that. Thanks for letting me know about that one. I didn't know about that.
Okay. Well, guys, it's actually been really great getting into this and hearing from your perspective, Al, especially because, you're bringing a completely different perspective and you've got such a depth of knowledge of what's happening across the women's game. It's been fantastic having you here, and it's actually been great getting back into our first episode of Season 7.
Yeah, well, thank you again. Like I said, Paul, Jacinta, for having me. It's always good, especially to talk with you finally over the airways. So I'm definitely happy, you brought me on for this, and would definitely love to do it again sometime.
Oh, absolutely. Thanks so much for your time, Al. Make sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts so you get our latest pod. And we really appreciate if we could get a like and a review so we can extend the reach to more listeners. And don't forget, follow us on Instagram, Twitter and LinkedIn.